being wrong in religion and spirituality. Apologies to Oscar Wilde. For those of you well read out there, as I'm sure all of you are. And I begin with a statement from Moliere. He always seemed to have something witty. He said once, "It infuriates me to be wrong when I know I'm right." And that's perhaps a little bit of an indication about what I hope to speak with you about for a bit this afternoon. I first became interested in this topic about being wrong, and particularly in religion and spirituality, when I had a colleague who worked in a hospice with people who were near the end of their lives and helping them to bridge that particular point as best they could and supporting them. And I was fascinated that she said that there was a certain kind of person that had the most difficulty dealing with being in a hospice. And I said, well, what is that? What kind of people? And it turned out that was Protestant ministers that seemed to have the most difficulty. And I said, well, I'm very struck by that. I mean, I would have thought that, ministers, being very pastoral people, probably would be among the best people in a hospice. No, they were absolutely impossible. They were absolutely a holy terror. I said, well, why? Was it they were concerned about, the pain or the difficulties as they would pass it? No. Or were they concerned about people they would be leaving behind and who would take care of what they did? No. She said it was very simple. As they were facing the end of their lives, going across to whatever was, the thing that most worried them was that they might be wrong. They might have got it wrong. There might not be an afterlife. There might not be somebody to welcome them at the pearly gates, so to speak. And it turned out that really desperately worried those Protestant ministers. The possibility of being wrong was very upsetting to them. Now, I know that none of you are ever wrong, unlike me, having the experience quite often of being wrong, but it's something that I encounter quite a bit. And I give you, now you always sit here and you see, what it looks like the minister or the layperson that's up doing the service, but most of the time when I'm looking out, I see something like this in the pews. Everyone paying rapt attention, listening to every single word and digesting it. Not really, but that's okay. But sometimes you get it really, really wrong. Like there's a person in a congregation that I go to quite often that talks to me about a sermon that I gave one time that really, really impressed her, really made a difference in her life, really changed everything. And so I said, well, tell me about it. I better start using that sermon in other places. And she said, well, it was the one where you talked about the singing and talking duck. I said, the sermon about the singing and talking duck. And I had to really work on that because, to tell you the truth, I've never, ever preached a sermon that talked about a singing and talking duck. I've preached many strange things, many unusual topics, many all off-the-wall things, but never about a singing and talking duck. Now, of course, I've spoiled it, haven't I? Because now I have done a service that I talked about a singing and talking duck. But I just could not get this person to acknowledge that. They were absolutely convinced that I gave them a service about a singing and talking duck, and it actually changed their lives. Now, after 3 times that I went to that place, and we went through this whole routine again, as no, I didn't preach about a singing and talking duck, I finally gave up. Because, in fact, whether I preached it or not, she received a sermon about a singing and talking duck. And it changed her life. And whether it was wrong or right, didn't matter. I used to give people printed copies of sermons on occasion, and stopped doing it, because they would come up to me and say, that's not what you preached. I said, yes, that's exactly, here's the script. But what they heard, what they experienced. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, about what's really important is not so much what is wrong or right, but where we are, how we deal with things, whether we have humility, whether we have openness, or whether we find ourselves like this couple, always being absolutely convinced that you can't hear a seal bark, because how can a seal bark when you're in bed, right? But as this James Thurber cartoon shows, sometimes what we think is not possible is actually possible. We think we see things exactly as they are. And those of you that were here a couple months ago when I did an address about what you see can make an impact on what you believe, there are many different ways of seeing the world. And in fact, you probably sit there, as I do, assuming that you know exactly what you see in front of you. But in a minute, I'd like to show you perhaps that you don't. But I'd just like to say that as enticing as it would be, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about what being wrong means today. Now, I could, but we'd be here for hours, and you might be heading over to those comfy chairs and not be too happy with me. So I just want to say, if you want to delve more into this absolutely fascinating topic, there is a book you can look at with this very functional picture on the front, which is a good illustration of being wrong. Being Wrong, Adventures in the Margin of Error by Catherine Schultz. And she's written this fascinating book, and she's done a very good TED Talk, if you look at TED Talks at all. But today, I just want to focus on the impact of being wrong. And I leave you to there to look at more. Okay, now you think when you look here, you see exactly what's there. You do in a sense, but in another sense, you see what you want to see there, what you expect to see there. We actually walk around with mental maps in our heads, so to speak, with preconditions, with assumptions about how things look. That's how comes we get it wrong sometimes. We assume someone, well, like for example, I assume someone constantly, if I see someone with jeans with holes and the pockets hanging out, that that means they don't have much money, until my daughter told me that's high fashion and they probably paid more for those than for jeans that are totally together. We have preconditions about how we see things. And these mental maps are the way we explain what we see. But we assume that it's the gospel truth, when in reality, it's our assumptions, our interpretations of how we see around us. Let me just give you a sort of a small example to try and illustrate this point. Now, some of you may have seen this before, but you see this, you see there are two squares marked A and B, yeah? Now, are the two squares marked A and B, are they the same color or are they different colors? What do you think?
They're different colors.
They're different colors, right, okay, and which one is darker?
A.
A, and B is lighter. Does everybody agree with that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
No? What do you think, Bill?
I just noticed the effect of the shadow of the cylinder
Yeah,
may have something to do with how we interpret.
You've looked ahead, haven't you?
I don't know.
No, exactly. Yeah, well, you see, this is exactly it. Is anybody else think think B is darker than A?
No.
No. Okay. Well, now actually, we're all, except possibly Bill, who's we're all wrong, because in fact, those squares are exactly the same color. They're exactly the same. Let me show you now. If I put two strips here across there, just so you can see. Look, have a look now. It's the exact same picture, just with those two stripes laid on. Are they two different colors or are they the same color?
Two different colors.
They still look two different
darker.
colors to you?
Oh, yeah, B still looks lighter.
Not as different, but A still does look darker.
Yeah, B is a little
Yeah.
lighter, but it's still lighter.
If you actually cut, and the next step, but you can't do it with the screen, is some people can actually cut. If you cut it here like that,
Yeah.
you will see that they are actually exactly the same color,
I don't see that.
exactly the same shade. Here they are next. Even that, it still looks different, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Cylinder's pretty.
You know, that's a different color.
This is a phenomenon which the eyes do, because they're trying to sort of make sense. Yes? Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just.
Oh, you're just right. Okay, just trying to, yes, yeah. And there's a whole series of these that you can find on the web. That if you put additional other stimuli around, it causes you to have different assumptions about what's there, when it's actually the same thing. Now, just to give you a sort of a little bit more of a humorous kind of thing of an example of like a mental map. If you're any New Yorkers here, or anybody who live in New York, okay, well, here's what it looks like to a New Yorker, the world. 10th Avenue, the Hudson River, and there's little tiny thing to see over further. And if you, for those of you that want the Dutch version, we all have mental maps. We all make assumptions. We jump to conclusions, although we assume that what we see is exactly what is there, based on our stories, based on what's important to us, based on where we live, who we care about. All these things come together in how we look and make decisions. And it's one of the reasons why we often get it wrong, why we often misunderstand, perhaps, what's going on, because we're working from these mental maps. The human animal is incredibly clever about filling in information they don't have. But the problem with that is we don't realize that we're doing it. We don't realize that we're judging that those two squares are different, when in fact they're actually the same color. Or that actually Amsterdam is a little bit smaller than South America, even though people may think of it that way if they're living in the Netherlands. The trouble is when we don't understand that, when we stop and we think that what we see is exactly what's there. And if we're a Muslim, anything else but Islam is not what's there, is not correct, is they've got it wrong. If you're a Christian, anything that's not Christianity is absolutely wrong. That's what I want to focus on about what having these mental maps, having these judgments, what it causes us to do, particularly when we think that somebody else doesn't have it right. Don't know if any Downton Abbey fans here, but I was really struck by, in one of the episodes, when the Dowager played by Dame Maggie Smith, when she was asked, how does it feel to be wrong, when she really mucked it up? And of course, her response was, I wouldn't know, dear, I'm not familiar with the sensation. But really, when you think about saying something is right or wrong, it's not always just a factual decision, is it? I mean, have you ever been in that situation where somebody has shown you something that proved to you that you're wrong about something, but it just doesn't feel right? You know it's true. You know it's right, even though they've shown you that it's not right. Because when we feel something is right, it's often not just a factual decision. It's often a feeling. It's often a belief. We make all these assumptions that are part of our mental map when we look and see what things that are around. And it becomes very, very important to us whether we're right or wrong. Anybody here ever been wrong? Yeah, okay. How did you feel about it? Were you happy about it? No?
Sometimes, yes.
Sometimes? Oh, you were happy about it. Why were you happy about it?
Because things turned out to be better than I thought.
All right, okay.
He's pessimist.
Pessimist. Anybody ever been very disturbed that they were wrong? Anybody ever been very upset that they were wrong?
A little.
A little. Although sometimes we have ways, particularly us intelligent, rational Western liberals, of just dealing with things and making them go away, isn't it? And then it's not so much a problem. I mean, if it doesn't matter who's right and who's wrong, why don't I be right, you be wrong? Or if you're a Dilbert fan, here's a little example where the egghead. I mean, one of the things where it's challenging for us, I think, to really get into this idea about being wrong and what it happens is we think we're pretty comfortable with accepting when we maybe aren't too right or are wrong or something. But then it really, really gets challenging when you're somebody who it really makes a difference for. When you're somebody in the Far East and who thinks that we all need to follow Muhammad, for example, or anything like that. It really does matter for people. And we tend sort of to personalize it quite a bit. Either you're the kind of person who knows you're right, no matter how many other people may have a different way of doing it. Or, alternatively, you ever heard of something called groupthink? Thing called groupthink that Conrad Janis came up with. The idea that if enough people believe it's got to be right, isn't it? And in fact, I've even seen Unitarians, who are usually perfect people, absolutely convinced of something because everybody else is convinced of it. It can almost be kind of like infectious, contagious. Why do we have wars and battles? And see, it's interesting, when I was sort of wanting to put this together and did my usual thing about looking on Google Images, I found there were far, far more images that I could find that are being wrong than probably anything else I'd looked for. But we do even go to war, don't we? About whether people are wrong or right, even today. And even most recently, it gets very, very difficult and very, very sad. Because, of course, in a larger scale, what happened in France and what happens in a lot of places now is about how people deal with who is wrong and right, and whether everybody has to follow a certain way of understanding things. Now, there's all kinds of interesting things that you can read about how the human mind gets itself in this trap. As, for example, some Christians get into a trap of being convinced that everybody's going to go to hell that doesn't follow Jesus, or other religions or other nationalities, because we don't realize that probably, actually, all of us probably mostly have it wrong, at least to some extent, to some degree. We have difficulties with this because of several classic assumptions that we deal with in terms of when we feel that somebody else is wrong and we're right, which is usually me. I'm usually the right one. And I usually deal with it in one of three ways. The ignorance assumption: the other people don't understand. The conservatives don't understand how they're mucking up the U.S. democratic system. If only they knew what I knew, they wouldn't vote for Bush or anybody like that, would they? Then the second one is the idiocy assumption. Well, obviously, those people that don't agree with me, they're just absolute idiots. They just really don't have a clue what's going on, do they? But the most dangerous one, and the one that caused me really to reflect on this, and why I showed the thing from the Charlie illustration and so forth, is the evil assumption. When you assume that those people that think something else is right and you're wrong, that those people are evil. Those people have to be dealt with. Those people have to be corrected or fixed or changed. And this is a world we live in now where anybody is fair game if you are wrong. People can be blown up. People can be terrorized. And it's not just an intellectual thing. It's a matter of faith. It's a matter of belief. It's a matter of being right or being wrong as being seen as something deeper than just a disagreement, but the whole difference of life. Now, why is it perhaps that people find it so difficult and so challenging when they are wrong or think other people are wrong in this sense? Well, it's interesting to read what the researchers and writers talk about, if you feel something to be absolutely right, it's very hard to let it go. And it's very hard to let it go because it's not like just sort of saying, well, okay, I'll give you an example. If you would say to a Christian, a very strong Christian, probably Jesus actually didn't rise from the cross, rise from the grave. But that's okay. I mean, what's important is the fact of the teachings of Jesus. That's about being good to each other, the golden rule. But actually for them, their whole understanding of faith and life may be based around the fact that for them, Jesus rose. And if Jesus didn't rise, then everything goes out the window for them, or might go out the window, or so they fear. It is a real thing for people to be concerned about being wrong or right in a way that perhaps maybe we don't always understand because we get, they call us wishy-washy, don't they? Because we're sort of easygoing. But for many people in the world, whether you're wrong or right is a very fundamental thing. And the really dangerous thing is when you're right. From the great sage, whoops, sorry, you get back in there. From the great sage and the book of literature, Harry Potter, Dumbledore says people find it far easier to forgive others for being wrong than for being right. And so is true. Now, whilst it's right, and I think important, that we have responded to things like the terrorists that blew up the magazine, or that shot the people at the magazine headquarters and so forth, with great demonstrations and rallies and affirmations of freedom of the press and of freedom of expression. Has that really changed how anybody else thinks in the world who is concerned about the fact that there are magazines that take Muhammad in vain, or so they see, and so forth? And again, this is where I think it gets into a real challenge to be dealing with matters of rightness and wrongness in more than just simple intellectual terms. So I'm going to whip through a couple slides here and even suggest that sometimes being wrong is the right thing to do. Sometimes being wrong is the right thing to do. Like, for example, in that example I gave about the woman who was convinced that my greatest sermon was the one about the talking and singing duck. The more I tried to sort of bring her the truth, the more I was making things difficult for her. So if we're going to try to find a way forward through people who are so extremely divided about what is wrong and right, it isn't just simply a matter of debate. It's actually a matter of changing those mind maps. It's actually a matter of moving on to trying to make people more open-minded. Now, how do you make people be open-minded? You just wave Dumbledore's wand and it happens, don't you? It's not quite so easy. And in fact, it maybe even needs to begin with us, because of course we're all open-minded, aren't we? Except on the things that are difficult for us. So I want to close by saying that the way to start to move forward is firstly to accept that we are wrong sometimes, to be open about it, just as Wow was important about the importance of being earnest, the importance of being wrong, and knowing that we're going to be wrong in religion and spirituality can be humbling. And hopefully maybe if we live that, we can help other people see that. And to actually question everything, even those things that we are absolutely certain about. Because I would suggest, friends, that actually when we are wrong, or at least open to being wrong, willing to be wrong, that's when we learn, or at least one of the ways that we learn. Sometimes composers, I'm told, hit wrong notes when they're actually creating a composition and discover a melody or a strain which they had never thought of, but has just come to them accidentally on the way. Albert Einstein famously said, "Anyone who has ever made a mistake has never tried anything new." And so I would close by asking for a bit of humility as we look about the difference between being wrong. Being wrong is not something to be upset about, but something to see as an opportunity. And maybe somehow in spending time with other people and those who are absolutely so rugged about people who are wrong, we can maybe start to have some conversations. Maybe not with the zealots, but maybe with the people in between. To come to a conclusion that we're all wrong. But that if we don't worry about too much about being wrong, we might not destroy the world, as Gary Larson shows in his cartoon, by being wrong without stopping to see where people really are at. The importance of being wrong in religion and spirituality. A topic I haven't exhausted, but hopefully I've at least opened the door for us to reflect on the importance not just of argument and debate, but understanding that people see the world differently, and just forcing them to see it as we see it will not bring harmony or discovery. In fact, by being humble, by listening and sharing and developing an open mind, perhaps there can be some openings for a future in our world that so desperately looks so divided now. The importance of being wrong in religion and spirituality. A virtue, I think, because no one has certainty. Amen.